There's much to talk about. Let's get to our panel. With us here in Washington is Perry Cammack. He's a fellow with the Middle East program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Amotz Asa-El joins us from Jerusalem. He's a senior commentator with the Jerusalem Post. And with us from our newsroom is Omar Baddar. He's the deputy director at the Arab American Institute. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Omar, let me start with you and a bit of background here. So, this site that is in contention right now, it is a site which is known as the Temple Mount to Israelis. Muslims call it the Haram al-Sharif. It is where the Al-Aqsa Mosque is located. What is the significance of this site to Muslims?
Yeah, it's incredibly significant, not really just to Muslims, but to Palestinians in general, regardless of their religious orientation. I mean, at the end of the day, what this boils down to is the fact that this is a site that is Palestinian territory that Israel illegally occupies. You know, East Jerusalem is recognized by every international organization as illegally occupied Palestinian territory. And the situation that we're really seeing unfolding right now boils down to the fact that Israel is exercising more control over territories that don't belong to them and sites that don't belong to them. So I think these security measures that we're seeing right now are just the straw that broke the camel's back.
Amotz, here we have a site which is significant to both Muslims and to Jews, as I was saying. When the Israeli government took this decision to install metal detectors at the site, would the government have consulted with the Palestinians, given the sensitivity of this site, and recognizing that this could inflame tensions?
Before I answer that, I want to say about what Omar just said, that it is not internationally recognized Palestinian occupied territory, but rather it is legally occupied following the 1967 war. Occupation is a legal term, which of course entails certain commitments. That's a separate discussion. But even after one defines it as occupied, it is not Palestinian occupied land as things currently stand in terms of international law, for the prosaic reason that there never was previously a Palestinian state that could have been considered its sovereign. This is the legal aspect. To answer your administrative question concerning who was and wasn't consulted on the eve of the recent day's events, I believe that there has been, before, during, and after these events, ongoing interface between Israeli and Palestinian security systems, but at the same time, this did not happen because of anyone's masterminding from above. This was an eruption from below, and therefore the question to the Israeli government is not whom they may or may not have consulted from outside, but what kind of considerations they took from within. And in this regard, we in the Israeli media suspect that some advice, very possibly from the Israeli security service, was ignored, that positioning those metal detectors on Temple Mount might prove counterproductive and unwise.
So, Perry, here we have a situation where the Israelis have dismantled the metal detectors, but they're going to install cameras, which they say can do the job as effectively as well. We have the Palestinians who are digging in. President Mahmoud Abbas has said that he will not resume communication with the Israelis. The Palestinians have also announced a day of rage this Friday. How does something like this get resolved?
Well, it's a good question, Anand. I mean, as I see it, we're now here on Wednesday. Essentially, we have 48 hours or less to find a way for cooler heads to prevail, to find a way out of this. I mean, it's clear to me that nobody wants a full-scale eruption of violence in Jerusalem. I think tensions have reduced a little bit over the last couple days, but I think if there aren't further steps, and frankly, further steps from both sides, and this is not about playing the blame game or kind of looking backward, but really just kind of looking forward, if kind of steps aren't taken from both sides, I think we really are looking at the possibility, not the guarantee, but the possibility of an eruption. And I think the steps are, on one side, I think the Israelis have to understand that while they have legitimate security concerns, there is a kind of more than 5-decade, 6-decade tradition of no changes to the status quo in this very sensitive territory. So any changes to that status quo have to be done very carefully through certainly cooperation with both the Palestinians and the Jordanians. From the Palestinian side, to this point, I think we've seen Palestinian officials, including President Abbas, kind of stirring the pot a little bit, encouraging, as you say, kind of more displays of public protest. And I actually think that's dangerous. This is really a moment for both sides to kind of say, look, it's a dangerous situation. We have to find ways, even if only for our own benefit, to keep things from really spinning out of control.
Omar, the Israelis say that this is about security. It's about safety for the worshippers there. And as Perry just pointed out, President Abbas may be stirring the pot here.
You know, it's kind of a bit absurd, honestly, to talk about it in this context. I mean, look, first of all, when it comes to the occupation, there's a ton of UN resolutions that say that Israel is obligated to withdraw from the territories they occupied in 1967 in exchange for Palestinian recognition of Israel. That recognition came in 1988 and continued throughout the entire peace process with the idea that in exchange for that, Israel was going to withdraw from the occupied territories, and they never did. So the legal status of East Jerusalem is very clearly illegally occupied at this point, and that's why the International Court of Justice condemns any building of settlements and any building that Israel does in East Jerusalem. But as far as the security point is concerned, I mean, all you have to do is just imagine the situation is flipped. Imagine if there was a security incident that erupted in Tel Aviv, and then the Palestinian Authority sent in armed guards and metal detectors and cameras and put them out around sensitive sites around Tel Aviv. The discussion would not be about whether specific security measures were a problem. Everybody would be talking about how ridiculous it is that the Palestinian Authority gave itself the right to go into territory that does not belong to it, to exercise security control over it. And this is really the bottom line.
Amotz, what is your response to that?
Yeah, I'm saying that Israel did place on the counter all the goods that Omar now mentions, while conveniently ignoring the fact that the UN resolutions, of course, all discuss that kind of barter in the framework of a peace agreement. The peace agreement was proposed with Israel's full consent by Bill Clinton in 2000, and the Palestinians rejected that. The same thing happened later with Omar. So this is why we have the situation. This is why we have the situation whereby there is a stalemate, and the deal that Israel wanted to strike, and that the Israeli voter repeatedly elected leaders who would deliver.
No, the stalemate.
That deal did not happen because Palestinian leaders retreated from that. And
no, that is simply not the case.
The dotted line. The
reason why the peace agreement failed was precisely because Israel continued to expand settlements more and more throughout the occupied territories. They, in essence, were entrenching the occupation of the Palestinian territories further at a time when they were supposed to be withdrawing from it.
What happened in the talks at Camp David in summer 2000. This is not what transpired between Mahmoud Abbas and Ehud Olmert. They did put the goods on the counter, and the Palestinian leaders, in response to these Israeli proposals, refrained from signing the deal. These are the facts.
The closest we've come to resolving the conflict was in the year 2000 during the Camp David Accords, and the person who was Israel's foreign minister at the time, Shlomo Ben Ami, said that had he been Palestinian, he would not have accepted that offer because it fell significantly short of giving the Palestinians true sovereignty.
All right, I want to move on. Perry, one of the explanations we're hearing for what is happening right now, and this is something that came from an analyst at the Brookings Institution, who said that this may be about security issues, but he says that's a minor technical issue. What it really is, this analyst says, and he's an Arab analyst, he says this is about Israel's assertion of sovereignty over this particular site, and by extension, over the whole of Jerusalem.
Well, I think this is a case, Anand, where perception is reality. Right. I think, I mean, we had, frankly, a brutal terrorist attack 10 or 11 days ago. I think any government would kind of consider taking steps to prevent a recurrence of that. However, I think, as both of guests have alluded to, this was done in a way which was seen as a pretty significant break with the status quo. What worries me in hearing the discussion, obviously tensions are high on both sides. There are, you know, right now I think is not the time to be talking about 2000. Right. Now is not the time to be talking about final status issues, as critically important as they ultimately are. Right now we have a Tinder keg that's threatening to blow up. So from my perspective, the first immediate step is how do we get through Friday without riots erupting, without more blood on the streets? If we can do that, if we can find ways to de-escalate the situation, then by all means the issues that Amotz and Omar are talking about need to be on the table. But for right now, I think we really need to keep our eye on the prize, and that is avoiding an explosion, which really would be catastrophic to both sides.
I fully agree with Perry that we first of all must face the tactical situation of this particular moment, and in this regard, I think that the Israeli side has done a gesture or what is clearly a pragmatic move by removing the metal detectors, and it would be very useful now if Palestinian leaders would answer in kind and speak up against incitement, both publicly on formal channels and informally on social networks, the kind of incitement that ultimately leads the masses to the streets and to take up arms.
Okay, talking about the Palestinian response, Omar, I want you to take a listen to what President Mahmoud Abbas had to say. Let's watch.
In light of what has happened, in the name of the Palestinian leadership, I announce the freezing of communications with the occupation state on all levels until Israel commits to canceling the measures it is taking against our Palestinian people generally and the city of Jerusalem and the Al-Aqsa Mosque in particular.
So, Omar, President Abbas has frozen all contact with Israel. Yeah, is this also a bit of politics on his part to show Hamas that actually I'm in charge here, my views count?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. I mean, at the end of the day, the Palestinian Authority depends on the U.S. and Israeli governments, basically, for its existence. So I think this is a cosmetic move to sort of like, you know, rally public support behind the Palestinian Authority. But, you know, when it comes to incitement about this issue, you have an Israeli member of the Knesset, his name is Oren Hazan, who was talking about finding the Palestinian attackers that basically kicked off this particular crisis and executing their families. I mean, he's talking about actually attacks on civilians. And you have another Likud minister who's close to Benjamin Netanyahu, warning the Palestinians about a third Nakba. And of course, for those who don't know, the Nakba is when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were expelled from their towns and villages to allow for the creation of the State of Israel. So I think when we talk about incitement, it's really important not to give a pass to Israeli government officials who engage in rhetoric that is absolutely unacceptable.
Amotz, are those sentiments?
I'm unaware that these statements were made. Some Israeli politicians, also very marginal ones, spoke of capital punishment to terrorists themselves. I'm unaware of anyone, be they as marginal as they be on the Israeli political spectrum, actually spoke of hurting anyone that was not personally involved in committing an attack. I'm unaware that such statements were made, and would be very useful if Omar would say when exactly those statements were made.
Yeah. The statements were just made.
What kind of channel? Because I'm unaware that they were made.
Yep, anybody can Google it. Oren Hazan, last name is H-A-Z-A-N. Just Google it and see there's a bunch of translations that are flying around.
Who says he made those statements? Who says he made those statements? I've seen the video of it. I've seen the actual video of it. Just anybody can Google it, and I'm happy to post it on my personal Twitter feed after the show.